Hello, everybody. My name is Leah McLeese, and I am the administrative assistant here at Africa Fire Mission. I am so happy to see everybody in training today. Thank you all for coming and participating today. We're really excited for today's training. I just wanted to remind everybody that this training is free of charge and it will be recorded, and then I'll post it up on our YouTube channel later today so you can go back and view it just for a refresher, or if you wanted to share it with any friends or colleagues that you have. I also invite you guys to share this link in the registration with your colleagues or anyone interested in learning more about the fire service so they can join us for next week's training. Just another reminder for you guys, I will be sending out certificates today after the training for everyone who participated in at least 75% of the training. So that is usually 45 minutes. So as long as you guys are here and active for 45 minutes, you will be getting a certificate at the end of the training. So if your name on Zoom is not the name you want on your certificate, I just ask you to either fix it, or you can text me over Zoom and let me know what name you want on the certificate, and I'll get that changed for you. But other than that, I just want to welcome Josh Bardwell here with us today. He's going to be presenting. I'm just going to hand it over to you right now, Josh, and you can get us started.
All right, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for those of us here stateside. Appreciate y'all showing up. We're going to be talking about wildfire behavior. So talking about weather, wildfire behavior, how that pairs together to actually create the wildfire situation we deal with. And if by understanding fire behavior and fire weather, we can best address our tactics on how to fight wildfires. Right now in Texas, where I'm at in the central United States, we're going through a pretty good wildfire season. My crew and I just came back yesterday evening from a 2-week assignment fighting wildfires. So I hope y'all find this beneficial. It doesn't matter what continent you're on, what country you're from, whatever. Fire behavior is fire behavior. Fire weather is fire weather. The same thing you deal with, I deal with over here. I was in Kenya last year doing some training at the national conference and got to go around the country, look at the fuels, vegetation. It's very identical to what I have in my response areas. So I'll go ahead and kick it off and we will start fire behavior. This is part of a larger presentation that I've put together, but we're going to be pulling from this section here. All right. This is part of Unit 3 of a larger presentation that we developed. Took the National Wildfire Training for Introductory Firefighters in the United States, and a couple of years ago broke it down to be a training for Texas firefighters, and then from there broke it down and revamped it a little to be more adaptable to Kenya, Eastern Europe, wherever else needed. So that way we're all on the same page. It's not Texas centric, whatever. Some of the pictures are from my area, photos we've taken, but it's very applicable to wherever your country is, whatever else. And I will try to monitor the chat halfway decent. If y'all have a question, we'll try to address that, but bear with me. We'll cover some information, then we'll try to actually have a good discussion towards the end. So fire behavior in regards to wildland fire. So what is fire behavior? It's the manner in which fuel ignites, flames develop, spreads, exhibits of phenomena, the compound effects, the fire's environmental, how fire actually behaves. So it's what's the fire doing, right? All right, so these videos don't work, but as you can see, this is in the middle of the night. Photos from a fire we worked about 10, 15 years ago. Very similar fuels outside of Nairobi, but this is in Western Texas. This is the middle of the night. Normally our humidity comes up, winds go down, so therefore fire behavior moderates. Not the case. So one of our objectives, we're going to talk about the fire triangle, which is firefighters. We're all familiar with the fire triangle, right? Structure fire, wildland fire, we still got the fire triangle, but we're going to talk about the effects fire by the volume of fuel, fuel size, fuel arrangement, and then how topography impacts that. And we're going to define the rating system used might go into media, news relation, this and that. That's small potatoes compared to what you need to know today. So one of the things we also need to do is fire prevention in relation to fire rating. So basically the fire behavior fuels this and that. How much danger, wildfire danger, is there to my community, and what can we do about it? That may be a separate topic. We'll just see how we get to it. All right, get some of these tiles moved. There we go. All right. Bear with me. All right, there we go. So as we know, the fire triangle has been around for a long time, teach it internationally. To have fire, we need three things, right? Heat, oxygen, and fuel. Fuel being the compounds or the material that's going to burn. Oxygen, because fire has to breathe, right? And heat, so we have to have an ignition source. Same in structure fire. And so fire spreads because of the effects of three different things: conduction, radiation, and convection. We're kind of going back to school here. This is somewhat important as a firefighter to understand how heat's transferred, right? So conduction, we see conduction pretty regular. Conduction is transfer of heat through an object, you know, so this is direct transfer of heat from one object to another directly. Least effect on the spread of wildland fire because wood is a poor conductor of heat. Now, I mean, this works, right? So if you have sticks laying down and fire will go from one, travel down a stick, and go to another stick, then it'll carry, right? All right. So conduction, yeah, that's fire moving from one point to another. Radiant heating or thermal radiation is heat emitted from surface of an object, which is due to the object's temperature. Radiant heat is what you can feel from a distance. It's like when you're sitting got a fire in the stove, or you're warming fire, your campfire, whatever else, and you feel the heat coming off of it. It's radiant heating, right? It's what we use to stay warm. This is pretty common in the wildland fire arena. Now, look back up and say, you'll hear me say wildland fire, wildfire. It's all synonymous. You know, we've got forest fires, bush fires, brush fires, grass fires, call them the same thing. They're all wildland fires. So for the sake of discussion, if you hear me use different terms, we're going to be on the same page. So the thing about radiant heating with radiation, it's heating, it's heat going forward to the vegetation ahead of it, right? So that's preheating. It's going to start baking and drying out that vegetation ahead of it. Very important to consider that radiant heating is preheating something ahead of the current fire to burn later. It's going to make it a lot more receptive. So it's something to keep in mind as you're coming up with tactics for fire suppression. And then convection, heat is transferred by the movement of hot air and smoke rising and heating the fuel above. We see that a lot, right? When we have a surface fire, a fire in the grasses or in the brush, and then it'll get up in the trees, right? So it's heat's been pushing up into the canopy, and then the canopy will ignite. In the eastern part of Texas where I am, we have forests that are relatively, relatively dense timber. Someplace we have trees that are over 100 foot tall, and we'll have a surface fire that would be a relatively intense surface fire in the brush, and it'll start baking or preheating that radiant heating going up into the canopy, or that convectional heating going up into the canopy. And we could actually have a second wave of fire come through later in the canopy of the tree. So as a firefighter, if you're down on the ground fighting fire and you have fire above you, that could be a real safety issue, right? So we have to be cognizant and paying attention to those kind of things. All right, so this is a pretty good little picture that shows what is conduction, convection, and radiation combined on one fire. So as you can see in this picture, we have our fire in the middle of the screen, and we can see where the log is preheated, duff, or the subsurface vegetation. And you see how conduction, convection, and radiation are all working together on the same fire, and how this could impact our fire area, right? So we're really getting into the physics and science of fire here. The big thing is to just realize, I think as a firefighter, one of the things we need to realize is safety and tactic based is we're going to be having vegetation dry out. We're going to have fire trying to carry multiple different ways, and to realize that, hey, you know, we've got the direct issue of fire where it's specifically at, plus where it could potentially be vertically or horizontally. All right, so let's talk about the factors that influence ignition and spread. Fuels, weather, and topography. I don't care what country you're in. I don't care what continent you're on. I don't care if you live in the forest, if you're in the plains, or if you're on the savannah or whatever. Fuels, weather, and topography, those are the three things that are always going to drive your fire, right? The biggest influence you can have. And we'll go into that. And a lot of these things, you know, and we just want to make sure that we are basing our firefighting tactics on those influences of fire, right? All right, so we'll talk about fuels. We'll go in this in a little detail. So fuel size, fuel moisture, and fuel continuity. So when we say that, these are the different parts of when we talk about the importance of knowing and recognizing the fuel's conditions. Well, we're going to be looking at fuel size, the moisture, the fuel moisture within that fuel, which affects its how it's receptive to fire or not receptive to fire, and the continuity, which is going to be the layout of this, that. It's going to change, you know, it affects the direction in which fire can go, the severity of it. All right, so fuel size, as we all know, the smaller the fuel, like your grasses, are going to ignite faster, right, than that big log that may be laying on the ground. Smaller fuels contributes to faster spreading fires in a short duration because it's flashy fuels, right? It catches, ignites quickly, and it goes. I mean, these things happen. Larger fuels ignite and burn slower. They're harder to put out sometimes, right? A log on fire or a big piece of debris is a little harder to put out, but it takes it longer to catch on fire. So it could be a longer duration fire, slower spreading. So again, fuel size, you know, we're going to start a fire. We use kindling. We use our small fuels to start a fire because it's easier to do. So the things where this fuel size is important to think about based on our tactics and safety is you pull up or you're going to work this fire and it's in tall grasses, a field, something like that, and you have a decent wind or whatever, that grass is going to ignite quickly, right? It could spread quickly. So it really matters what your tactics are, where I can safely engage this fire, because this fire is either going to outrun me or it's going to move very quickly. And so I need to be in the right place at the right time, right? Again, as we talk about the science of fire, I want you to be thinking about what would I do as a firefighter? How does this impact my tactics, right? How does this impact my firefighter safety? Because I want to make sure that everything you do as a firefighter, one, our job is to act, right? Duty to act, fight fire, but we need to do it safely because a dead firefighter can't help the public, right? So I want you to be safe so that we can do good for the public and the people we serve and our other firefighters. All right. So in the United States, we categorize our classes of fuels. We call them 1 hour through 1 hour, 10 hour, 100 hour, 1,000 hour. Basically a 1 hour fuel. And when it says hours, that is the amount of time it takes for that vegetation to lose or gain 100% of the fuel moisture within it. Not a big thing you have to know, but it's not a bad idea to think about. So let's say your grasses, litter, duff, that's your fine fuel, smaller than a 1/4 inch in diameter. It can gain or lose all of its moisture within an hour. Or, you know, so twigs, small stems, it would take them 10 hours if it's 1/4 inch to 1 inch. Now you see your 100-hour fields, 1 inch to 3 inch, larger branches, smaller logs. It could take up to 100 hours for them to gain all their moisture if they were in a complete dry state, or it could take them 100 hours to lose all their moisture in a complete dry state. And then the 1,000-hour fields, large stems and branches, logs, typically down trees. Your telephone poles would even go into that if it was laying on the ground. That's things that are diameter larger than 3 inches. Not a huge thing to know, but the deal is if you have a whole lot of grasses, if you have a whole lot of twigs, they're going to dry out faster, right? In the morning, let's say you have a dry morning, you had a dry evening, you didn't have a whole lot of humidity recovery, and it's bushfire season. Your grasses are going to be receptive to fire early on in the day, right? Well, if it's 10 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning and your grasses are already very receptive, and even your small twigs and branches are very receptive to fire, by later in the afternoon, your large logs are going to be really receptive to fire, right? So it's those things to think about is like, okay, and we call that a time lag. And so you need to be, as a firefighter, I'm cognizant of what my vegetation is doing. And like, okay, so if we had a fire right now, or we have a fire later this afternoon, what are going to be my receptive fuels going to look like? How busy are they going to, or I mean, how receptive are they going to be to fire impingement? Is this going to flash and go quickly, or is it going to go slowly? So fuel moistures, continuing with that, fuel moisture is the amount of water in a fuel, right? So every organic thing, every live thing holds moisture. We take it in, and then we expel it one way or the other. So the more moisture that's in a fuel, the more heat it requires to ignite it, right? Basic fire principles here, pretty easy to understand. So like right now, where I'm at, I'm in the middle of a rainstorm, which we haven't seen in a while. So hopefully my power stays on and all that good stuff, so I can keep talking with you guys. But so we went from having very dry vegetation overnight, where we had very low fuel moisture, to now our fuel moisture is 100%. I mean, I couldn't go start a fire to save my life out here. So fuel size is a factor. Smaller fuels burn quicker than larger at the same moisture content. We talked about that a little while ago, right? It's about that surface area moisture and all that good stuff. Again, we're getting into the deep science of some of this, or relatively deep science of it. But again, cognizant things to think about when you're going out and you're kicking the duff and checking the vegetation out there. All right, so I kind of touched on a little while ago, right? When your fuel moistures are low, like those grasses are real dry, you can expect rapid runs from wildfire, right? So your fire is going to it's going to catch and move quickly. Spot fires, that means if you have embers, or you wind up getting that sparks, embers, debris starts blowing across your fire line, or your counter burn didn't work out so well. As ash starts to fall in the receptive fuels, it has a better chance of catching. We usually will call that the probability of ignition. And so your percentages of that are a lot greater because the fuel is dry, it's receptive, it's ready to burn, it wants to burn. So things you have to keep an eye on. So the amount of moisture in the air also determines the amount in the fuels. That's our relative humidity, right? Dew points, relative humidity. The more moist the air is, it'll find balance in the vegetation a lot of times, unless you've been in a prolonged drought and now there's a deficit in your vegetation. So one of the big things is if we've been having dry air, or you're going to have a frontal passage come through, whether it's coming off the ocean, or it's coming across the mountains or the plains, and it's very dry air, it's going to suck the rest of that moisture out of your vegetation that's already on the ground, right? So as the day goes on, your heating goes on, your vegetation is losing moisture throughout the day, and then you start getting the influence of dry air on that. You need to keep in mind that it's going to suck that moisture out of the vegetation. It's going to make it more receptive. Again, things y'all probably very well aware of, especially if you fight fire in the wildland interface. And so we can also talk about live fuels versus dead fuels. Live fuels, obviously, if vegetation, grasses, weeds, plants, trees, if they're alive, they're going to have more moisture in them, right? Living vegetation, it's got, you know, phototranspiration, evapotranspiration, all the different processes that organic matter goes through. It's moving water from the root system to the leaves and vice versa. Dead fuels, if they're dead, they're not actively moving moisture up and down through the vegetation, right? So it's going to be standing dead. It's going to be standing dry. And the only way that that moisture is changing in dead fuel is really by the ambient air and air moisture adhering to it, right? So they're quicker to, dead fuel dries out much quicker than live fuels. But again, live fuels can burn. What I saw in y'all's country, very similar vegetation in our place, that we actually have some vegetation that the greener it is, the hotter it burns. It's because it has that kind of that waxy coating on the leaves, rottenness in a way on the cones, if it's on the pine trees. But we have some vegetation that has some acids or whatever in it that make it burn hotter. So there's always exceptions to the rule. And it's good to know what your vegetation does. All right. So fuel continuity. This one is pretty straightforward. I think everyone is very savvy with how this goes. So another factor is the continuity of fuels, and what is that continuity? So it's horizontal and vertical spacing of your fuels. So is it laid out across the ground? How dense is it up? How dense is it across? Do we have breaks in the vegetation like sticks and things? We'll go into this in a little detail. So what is horizontal spacing of fuel? Spacing of fuel are the distance between burnable fuel as it lies on the ground. So basically that is saying, let me, all right, so let me go through so let's say we're on the ground, have a flat plane. This is our ground, and you have fuel continuity of things laid out on the ground. Pretend these drip torch parts are actually, there we go. Pretend these drip torch parts are for vegetation. If these are separated from each other and this is on fire, there we go. If this is on fire, is it going to catch this on fire? Well, it can't really get to it, right? But if our horizontal spacing, this is on fire, it can catch this on fire, travel down to this. So it's unbroken, right? This helps with fire to continue to spread and work its way around. But if it's broken up, or we come in like we do when we cut fire line and we break these things up and we separate these fuels, this cannot burn over here now. Does that kind of make sense? So horizontal spacing, we can break up horizontal spacing. Our fire really can't progress much farther, right? Or we make our fire lines wide enough, or we remove the other vegetation, we're mitigating the issue of fire progressing even farther. It's a little off the cuff demonstration, but all right, let me get y'all back here. So we'll talk about vertical spacing. So if we know horizontal is vegetation on top of the ground, vertical spacing is clear, it's going to be vertical, right? So when fuels are closely spaced vertically, fire spread rapidly as convection heating preheats ignites fuel above. So let's say we have this tree here and it's standing up and we've got vegetation over here. As fire is on the base of the ground, it might carry up that tree, but if let's say this is a bush on fire, it's going to help carry fire farther up, right? It's going to keep heating and heating. So if there's no vegetation up here, the chance of fire getting to the crown is a lot less. But if we have thick shrubs, bushes, whatever else, it's going to keep preheating farther up the tree and eventually is going to cause problems potentially for us. It all depends again on your fuel moistures and everything else, but it all plays together. And if we want to deal with, if to eliminate vertical spacing issues, let's say we have a surface fire and we don't want to get into the crown of the canopy, we're going to have to remove some of those ladder fuels somehow. And those ladder fuels being that vertical spacing. How do we keep the fire from getting into the canopy of the trees, or how do we keep the fire from getting from the grass on the ground into the tops of the shrubs? Well, you know, there may not be anything we can do about it while we're fighting fire, but it may be one of those things we need to look at pre-fire actions around our communities, cleaning up around our homes, things like removing the All right, so here's a good picture to explain what we've been talking about with our fuel spacing. As you can see, horizontal, vertical. If there was a fire in this pine forest, do you think it's got the potential to have some pretty decent fire behavior? Absolutely. I mean, there's vegetation, live and dead, continuous across the bottom, on the surface, also going vertical into the canopies of the pine. This needle drape vines, things like that. So, you know, if you could remove the shrub component, vine component, it would be a lot harder for fire to get from the surface to the crown of the trees. Again, if we were trying to stop fire from progressing along the horizontal axis, we would need to put in a pretty decent fire break, right? We'd probably need to remove some trees. It's going to be labor intensive. All right, so we'll talk about the volume or quantity of fuel. How much fuel is burning or will burn is also very important, naturally, right? We'll talk about fuel quantity, and the denser we saw the vertical and horizontal. I've been dancing around this whole time, but the thicker the fuels or the more dense the fuels are, I mean, the more rapidly it's going to burn, right? And the more severe it's going to burn. This picture is a prime example of very dense timber. In order to stop this fire or to do the burnout operation that's or counter fire operation, it's a very large fire break in between it. So the quantity of fuel is going to require a huge amount of work at times, or a light amount of work. It just very, very much depends on what you're looking at. So we'll talk about weather influences. The weather we're halfway into, or we're 28, but the weather, again, this is the 100% most important thing to focus on in wildland fire. All your tactics need to be based on fire behavior and fire weather. Fire weather, and the weather is something you can know, you can get a pretty good idea of what the weather's going to do for the day. You know, with the weather forecast from the newspaper, from the weather service, or whatever you get your weather from, or if you're a rancher or farmer, you're pretty good about picking the weather out. I mean, I farm back home when I'm not fighting fire, and we like to stay on top of the weather, right? So the three most important weather factors as firefighters we need to focus on is temperature, relative humidity, and wind. We kind of talked about relative humidity a little while ago in regards to fuel moisture, but temperature, relative humidity, and wind, those are the three most important weather factors you need to know. Now, bear with me when we talk about temperature. It's probably going to be in Fahrenheit. I'm an American. It's in Fahrenheit. I'm not great at Celsius, but you know, y'all bear with me. But as we know, with temperature affects vegetation and fuels because it can preheat, right? So the warmer the day, hotter the day, you're going to start having evaporation of moisture from the vegetation. Your air temperature, as higher temperature days, your air temperature is warmer, so it's going to be preheating fuels. But at night, when the temperature goes down, you can start having cooling of the vegetation. You can start really buying a lot of time when it comes to firefighting at night, because it's cooler temperatures. The vegetation is now surface temperature is less. It's retaining moisture a little easier, and we're not having to fight as hot of a fire with cooler air temperatures. Relative humidity. So what is it? It's the amount of moisture present in a parcel of air compared to the total amount of air could hold at that temperature. It's a percentage. So if we said our relative humidity was 100%, it's probably raining outside, right? That means that your air molecule is predominantly water. When our relative humidity gets low, when it gets below 25%, where I'm from, 25% or lower is critical fire weather. Where I was just fighting fire, it's got to be less than 15% for it to be critical fire weather. We got down to 3% on a fire the other day, and it blew up. So that means that there was this little bitty amount of moisture in one whole air parcel. So it was a dry, warm air with very little moisture in it. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us that with relative humidity, our fuels are going to dry out faster and stay dry longer. Therefore, it's more receptive to fire. It's going to continue to progress farther. Relative humidity also tells us as firefighters, the drier the air is out there, the more we need to be drinking water and hydrating. So it's kind of one of those deals where the lower the humidity, more of an issue we're working with all the way around, from firefighter safety to fire behavior. So the humidity is very important. Low humidity days, fire is going to move. It's going to be active. It's going to be receptive. Definitely something to keep in mind. So when we talk about our weather influences, day versus night. Now, this is pretty broad based. I have seen the opposite to these. I have seen nights worse than the day, but that's not typically how things work. Typically during the day, you're going to have higher winds, lower humidities, higher temperatures, and the fires are typically harder suppressed during the day. Because we talked about, you've got the sun, you've had the heating, all these factors working against you. It's very good for the fire, but it's not good for suppression, right? But at night, typically you'll have lower winds, higher humidities, lower temperatures, which therefore makes fire easier to suppress. Again, that's typical, but not all the time. I mean, a week ago, I was on a fire and it was drier, hotter, and windier at 3 o'clock in the morning than it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that was on a frontal passage that was pushing through. But, again, day versus night, sometimes we can deal with wildfires and suppress them easier at night during the day. If we're constantly getting our butt handed to us and we're not making positive gains during the day, maybe we need to look at being more aggressive at night if we can mitigate the hazards of night firefighting, not being able to see as well, snags, trees, whatever other hazards there are. Again, things to consider, things to put in your mental toolbox and to work out. So wind. Of all the influences on fire behavior, wind has the greatest influence because wind pushes fire, right? Whichever way the wind's blowing, fire wants to go. I mean, it will back against the wind, but your wind, the higher the wind, the faster the fire. It will push fire downhill just as fast as fire will go uphill. Rates of spread and direction. If you start having wind changes on your fire, you could get caught. If you're having a westerly wind coming from the west, pushing your fire one direction, and you have firefighters south of it, and a north wind comes down, you could have firefighters trapped. Knowing what your wind's going to do are very, very important. Wind, generally blows upslope during the day and downslopes at night if you're in topography country. Sometimes it can be overcome, though. Sometimes you can get those prevailing winds, or you can get the eddying effect, what we call, where you have wind that starts funneling through basins or drainages, or, when you start looking at the Rift Valley running up and down through Africa, you have wind influences come from different ways. Again, and then coastal influences for those of you that may be living near the coast, whether on the Atlantic side or the Indian side or wherever, or the Mediterranean, you're going to have wind influences coming in off the coast. Wind can be your worst enemy on a wildfire, but it can also be your best friend, depending on if you're watching the wind, and at least it'll be telegraphing to you, hey, this is the way the fire wants to go. Well, all right. maybe we're not going to be actually able to fight this fire real well, but we can save these homes ahead of the fire, you know, evacuate the people, get the livestock out, whatever else. But wind is so important for building your tactics and deciding what needs to be done. I'm going to play a video here, and this will show some pretty righteous extreme fire behavior based on wind. This is in Colorado. It was a controlled burn, prescribed burn they were doing to manage vegetation, and the wind picked up. It's an unstable day, and those are what we call tumbleweeds. Where do you want it? Not real often. Combination of wind and heat. You know? Well, that could make things very interesting. So as you can see in this video, it's sustained winds creating its own atmosphere or its own environmental concerns or environmental factors on that fire, which is kicking their tail. All that hard work to hold the fire in could potentially be lost. So the video goes on, you see it, it's basically a tornado of burning tumbleweeds that's burning, throwing them on the other side of their fire line. I mean, just a bad situation. So that is sustained winds causing major issues on the fire ground. So things you may encounter. I've seen similar around here, but not to that extent. The video down below, this is something that I think a lot of you that work in the grasslands have seen and experienced. This is what we have been dealing with in the western part of my state in Texas right now with these, what we're calling, what the Weather Service calls Southern Wildfire Plains outbreaks. It's where the winds are, that we're having winds over 60 miles per hour or 80 kilometer per hour winds mixed with humidities that are below 10%. And a drought that's ongoing, and we have these fast moving wildfires that are so fast we can't put firefighters ahead of them except for to evacuate homes and try to save houses and let the fire pass by. So let's take a look at this video here. Oh no, well unfortunately that one doesn't work. So I should have another one in here, but it is rapid rates of spread on fires, jumping highways, things like that. So again, firefighter safety is key to make sure you're in the right place and you understand. Again, wind, fire is going to go the way the wind's going, right? So you don't want to be ahead of a fire that you can't do business in. All right, so what are some visible wind indicators? Smoke can tell you a lot, right? So smoke can show the wind speed and wind direction. A smoke column is going to lean into the direction the wind's going, right? Basically like a finger saying fire's going this way. Wind's blowing, smoke column, because it shears them over a lot of times. So it's a good way to see. If a smoke column is standing straight up, do we have high winds that day? Not really, right? So smoke's going straight up. There's nothing resistance-wise pushing smoke column over. If you're coming down the highway or you're going out to a fire and you see a smoke column that is laying right over the road, and I mean, that sucker is just right above the ground, probably got pretty strong winds, right? Pushing that smoke down because it's suppressing it. So wind's coming in, it's pushing that smoke column down. It can tell you a lot as a firefighter, especially when you're a few miles out or a few kilometers out to getting to your fire. You can start reading a lot, and I can see, okay, out there at that fire, that smoke column is laying down and it is long. So I've got probably high winds out at the location, and the fire is moving towards the east. So I've got an idea which way I'm going. Another major weather influence that we have to consider are the effects of thunderstorms on our wildfires. So gusty winds come out of thunderstorms, right? You can have outflow winds that'll go 360 degrees. The storm may be coming from the east, or maybe coming from the west or north, or wherever your storm wants to come from, but you could still have winds doing 300 degrees. So you need to watch out on the effects of storms, or thunderstorms, and those thunderclouds that start entering your fire area, that they're going to start having an impact on your wildfire. It could be a very negative impact, and as a firefighter, you don't want to be caught in the wrong place. You could be on a low intensity edge of the fire, towards the hill, or you've been mopping up, or you've got a good secure on the right flank of the fire or something, and you have a thunderhead come in with a downdraft. Your area might just become the most active area. It could be quite dangerous, and something we need to be concerned about. So watch the weather. And as a firefighter, sometimes it's really hard to be fighting fire and paying attention to the weather. If you can post a lookout, if someone, the instant commander or somebody, and say, hey, I need somebody to check the weather for me, and their job is to keep an eye on the weather and report to you firefighters changes in the weather, that puts you ahead of the game safely, right? You've got somebody that's watching that weather and saying, hey, we're having a wind change, whatever. That's insurmountable as far as the amount of intelligence you have now at your disposal. So work smartly, and be cognizant of such things. So topography influences. Topography is another, it's the third leg of the most important parts of influence of fire. Where is the fire burning, whether it be steep mountainous terrain or coastal plains, lay of the land, important. So let's go into some list. Slope, aspect, and terrain are three main parts of topography. Slope is how steep is it? The steeper the ground, the faster fire is going to want to go up, right? Aspect, the direction it faces, north, south, east, and west. In the northern hemisphere, your southern aspect, southern side of a hill or a mountain, is going to have sunlight more time, mostly out of the day, right? As the sun moves from east to west, the sun is going to be staying on the southern aspect more than well on the northern side. So for where I'm at, the southern side is going to be the warmer side. That's typically where a fire is going to be more active. And then terrain, local features of the land. So you may have valleys, gulches, creeks, river bottoms, basins, whatever, where fire has more wind or less wind, or it's going to be harder for it to get through or easier for it to get through. Chimneys, chutes, those kind of things. All right. So slope does have the greatest influence on fire spread when it comes to topography. Flames are closer to the fuels as it's leaning. As you can see in the picture in the bottom, there's a good example of slope and the impacts of fire. Wind currents normally push uphill. Heat rises along slope, increasing rate of spread. Burning embers can roll downhill, causing more, new fires, spot fires, whatever else. So things to consider. You've got convectional heating of it's preheating the fuels ahead of it. You've got radiant heating doing the same, and you've got conduction. You've got fire flames touching the next vegetation that's going to burn and continue. So you have slope can be a big deal. Flat country, again, flat country can be just as dangerous as steep country when it comes to fire. If you have open ground with high winds, flat ground, fire has no resistance, right? It's just going to keep trucking right across the countryside. All right, so I already touched on the north, south, east, and west Southern aspects, again, if you're in the southern hemisphere, your northern aspect is probably going to be that way, right? So, or it depends on the time of year, you know, where's the sun position during certain times of the year. So on south facing slopes like where I'm at, higher temperatures, stronger winds, lower humidities, lower fuel moistures. Why? Because the sun's been on it during the most part of the day. Again, if you're in the far southern part of the hemisphere, it's going to be opposite, right? You're probably going to have the northern. It's going to be your northern aspect. It should have those. So again, just depending on where you're at on the equator, which side of the equator you're on. Let's talk about terrain real quick. Special land features obstructions. Wind takes past the least resistance. So in this picture, we see this is a chimney. Basically, it's in a mountain or a big hill, and how wind will funnel up in between ridges. It's killed many a firefighter. In my country, I've had several friends killed this way. In the wrong place, wrong time, spot fire gets below them, and it runs right back up there. So, you need to be looking at the terrain in the area you're going, whether it's, all right, can our fire engine go there? Can a firefighter go there? What's the fire going to do in that topography? Do we stand a chance to make a difference? So, 8:46 at my time. There's the Wildland Urban Interface section is a rather long presentation that's usually a second part. But what I want to add in just for us to talk for the next 5 minutes is think about the weather. Factors we've been talking about, right? Oh, I was trying to close out of something and stand by. I'm a firefighter. I'm not a very good tech savvy person. So I appreciate y'all's patience so far. Y'all are doing a great job. But let me throw this out here real quick because I always do a plug on the Wildland Urban Interface. What is that? That is where our wildfires, bush fires, forest fires, grass fires, whatever you want to call them, start meeting where we live, right? Towns, communities, our farms, our camps, whatever. Wildfires affect those things, right? When we were in Nairobi, we saw that there were some areas where they were having interface fires in the city, and some of the wild areas around the creeks, ponds outside of town, it would come in and come pretty close to burning homes down. And of course, a lot of you that are in the rural areas or out in the rural landscapes encounter this all the time. My community where I fight fire in, almost every single wildfire I have is an interface fire. It's going to impact someone's home or someone's farm or someone's barn, livestock, power lines, whatever. So let's look at this list of wildland interface watchout situations, things that can cause a major issue in a wildfire situation if we don't address. So unified command is not implemented. We all should know how important it is to establish command, right? Someone's got to be in charge, or somebody's got to be planning. We have to answer to somebody on a fire as far as to look to somebody to start sorting this out. Unified command is set up when the first resource gets there. You may be the newest firefighter on the fire brigade. If you're the first one there, guess what? You're the boss until you can give it to someone else, right? But if you have multiple different jurisdictions working together, whether it's different communities, different counties, different fire brigades, or police and fire and EMS and whoever, you need to be on the same page, right? Working towards the same goal, right? Poor access and narrow one-way roads, bridge load limits. We run into that all the time where I'm at, and I'm sure you guys do too. I saw, sometimes roads non-existent, or they give out, or you don't know where they're going to go. So we need to be cognizant of our access points. Chaotic suppression actions or panic during public evacuations. The public, that can be one. We do this job to protect the public, but they can also be one of the biggest hazards, right? Because you can't predict what humans are going to do in time of panic. So this is where organization is very important. Try to be organized and methodical in how you do things in your suppression, knowing where you're going to go fight the fire, who you're going to be fighting the fire with, and having a plan. And then evacuations, having a coordinated evacuation instead of mass chaos where people are running into fire engines or blocking up roads and all that. Got to watch out for those things. Very dangerous. Extreme fire behavior, strong winds, drought conditions. Again, that's, we know how that affects wildfires, but we definitely know how that affects fire behavior throughout the day, right? Inadequate water supply. I guarantee you most of you have the same problem I do where I don't have good water supply. I'm having to draft from ponds or creeks, or I'm having to have a fire department bring a water guzzler or a water tender from somewhere else. So we have adequate water. So I've got to determine, how am I going to get water to my fire? Or am I going to be not using a lot of water and I'm going to be having to use bulldozers or hand tools, and we're going to be fighting this fire with dirt, soil. Wood construction and shake roofing, not really a huge issue in a lot of places in Africa that I've seen, but you may have some wood construction. In the western part of the United States, a lot of people still like to have cedar shingle roofs. Those catch on fire super easy, but people need to harden their homes. Make sure there's not a receptive way for fire to get in the wooden roof or under a house or something and catch fire. Another thing is natural fuels less than 30 feet from structures. You want to make sure you have a defensible space around a home. Firefighters can't be at every house, so I encourage you to empower the public in these rural areas to make sure that they have a house that can hopefully withstand impacts from wildfire in case a firefighter can never be there, or a firefighter can only be there for a short time, right? So you don't want to have bushes, brush, your wood, you don't want to have burnable debris just piled up within 30 feet of the house, right? Because if that catches on fire, it could catch the house on fire. And then if that house catches on fire, the next house catches on fire. How many times have we seen that, right? It's pretty common occurrence. So we want to give them the best chance. You want the best chance of survival of a house. If a firefighter's never there, that's the best thing you could ever have, right? Because we're going to be, as a good firefighter told me, oftentimes we are task saturated, resource limited. So we have so many tasks that we have to take, that we have to do as firefighters to do things. We only have so many firefighters. You're only going to get so many at so many times. So things to consider. Again, poor access around structures because accumulation of junk, etc. Kind of touched on that already, right? People have got to get it to where we can get a fire engine to the house, or they can get out, or that we have areas to work. Hazardous materials in the path of the fire, including unmarked barrels, dumps, etc. We run into that all the time, right? Pretty common where I'm at, of tire piles, or they'll have propane, natural gas bottles, tanks, things like that around the house, because a lot of people, that's how they fuel, or that's how they heat their homes or whatever else. Well, it can be very dangerous. Again, if it's in an industrial area or somewhere where I'm at, there's still is, but oil and gas, petroleum engine exploration. So we've got lots of barrels, we've got lots of production facilities around, and old oil wells in the woods. And we have some, sometimes you'll come across those things that you're like, oh, okay, well, this is a hazardous situation if that catches on fire. And then number 10, power line situations, unsure of power status. Propane tanks are, power line is down. We're always told, treat it as if it's live until the power company can tell you otherwise, if you even have that luxury. So, be safe around power lines. And then at the same time, propane tanks near structure, we talked about that as well. So with all that said, we know about fire weather and fire behavior, right? We know how to recognize these things. Hopefully, hopefully a lot of you already knew, and this was a refresher for you. But hopefully you got something out of it today to talk about the effects of fire behavior, fuels, weather, all that good stuff. Because you can turn around and need to do fire prevention back home. Keep pushing that message to the public, to the children, to the parents on what do we do to prevent unwanted wildfires, right? How do we stay safe? And so, you want to be looking at the fire dangers. Is today a bad day to burn? Be like, hey, it's low humidities and high winds. Perhaps you need to have a sign in the community or tell the public, be like, hey, I know you might want to burn today, burn your pasture, or burn your brush pile, or burn your trash, but perhaps we shouldn't do it today because we have low humidities and high winds. Therefore, we have very high fire danger. If your fire gets out, it might burn someone's houses down. So be working on a fire prevention program in your community so people can burn, and they can still have their fun with fire as far as burning their trash or managing their ag crops or fields, but they do it in a safe manner. They do it in a way that's not going to get firefighters strung out all day long fighting a fire, but also it's not going to impact their neighbors. So with that said, that is I'm going to stop sharing screen. That's really the quick and dirty. That we teach a lot of these classes. There's wildfire class in the United States where it's 40 hours worth of what I talked about, except in way more depth. You're going to have a lot cooler people talking about it that are experts in their field instead of just a firefighter that does, that recognizes and uses it. But anyways, so I hope y'all got a lot out of this today. It's very nice to be able to talk with y'all, and again, go forth and do good work, do it safely, and do it based on the fire behavior and fire weather you're recognizing. Build your tactics on that. Don't go put yourself in unnecessary danger without all the tools at your disposal. So hopefully you get up in the morning and say, hey, today is a no fire day, or today could be a very active fire, and you start recognizing such things. So Leah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. Adelino, I saw that your hand was raised there at the end. Did you have a question that you would like to ask real fast? Maybe not. All right, well, thank you so much again, Josh, for that wonderful presentation. I always enjoy learning about the behavior of fire because it just helps so much in learning how to better fight and better prevent, like you were saying at the end, better prevent those big fires. So thank you so much for coming on here and sharing with us today. I just want to remind everybody that in the chat, I just sent out an evaluation that if you would like to fill out, I would love to just see some feedback from you guys, whether it's just about this presentation today or about future presentations and topics that you want to hear about. We're always open to wanting to do what you guys want to do. So please fill that out, and then also be looking forward to those certificates that I'll send out later today if you attended 70% of the training. And today we are not going to be having tea time because Jose, our fire safety advocate, is not with us today. And so this will just be the end of the training, but I just want to thank everyone for coming on here today, and I hope that you guys have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.